Woody's classic song, "This Land Is Your Land," was long rumored to have missing verses lost to time. Turns out the campfire tune we all know started life as a protest song about the line between have and have not.
This land was made for you and me. All around.
In a few short lines, Guthrie captured both the promise and frustration of the America he knew.
African-American musician and bandleader W.C. Handy began to experiment with the unusual rhythms and cadence of the former slaves' music. At his headquarters on Beale Street, Handy wrote a wildly popular song called The Memphis Blues. Handy brought the music to a much wider audience, and today is known as the father of the blues. And here on Beale Street, it was Blues Central. By the 1920s, the sounds of the blues rang out on the streets of Memphis, especially here on Beale Street. In these clubs and restaurants was played some of the hottest music in the country. Over the next 20 years, Louis Armstrong, Muddy Waters, and many other blues legends performed on Beale Street. In the 70s, Beale Street was officially declared the home of the blues by an act of the United States Congress. It's one of the most storied addresses in popular music. And not too far away, there's another one. On July 5th, 1954, Sam Phillips was sitting in his office here at Sun Records when a 19-year-old walked in the door and sang, "That's All Right." That young man was Elvis Presley, and the song became an overnight sensation. During the hourly tours given here, visitors can touch the microphone and stand on the exact spot where Elvis stood to record his first song.
This is the hammer, killed John Henry, laid him low, laid him low. This is the hammer, killed John Henry, laid him low, Lord, laid him low. When John was sick, Polly drove steel, like a man, like a man. When John was sick, Polly drove steel, like a man, Lord, like a man. Oh, man. I'm drawn to songs that kind of talk about that struggle and the will to try and overcome that and overcome adversity. And so when a person writes a song, it's never in a vacuum. To me, I kind of feel like I'm like a vessel for whatever's happening, whatever I've experienced, whatever I've read or whatever I've heard. I'm a vessel by which I can put that out into the world by writing a song.
With this record is that it's a response, you know. It's like the black woman in this country is just like always on the bottom and has been, but she's always doing twice as much work and often leading the charge and then swept aside and forgotten about.
John Henry, won't kill me,
blues pilgrims, Clarksdale is Mecca. Just outside town, Highway 61 crosses over Highway 49. Legend has it that it was at this crossroads that Delta bluesman Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil, selling his soul in exchange for supernatural guitar skills. The blues grew a reputation for being the devil's music. The idea was that it must be bad for it to sound so good. In the first half of the 20th century, Clarksdale was the big town of the Delta, where folks went to spend money and have a good time. Juke joints filled the town. Many, like Red's Lounge, still operate to this day. Sharecroppers pass through shabby storefronts like this one to hear a new music. An earthy blend of African rhythms, spiritual hymns, and the field hollers of hard labor. It grew out of the darkest reaches of life, but was always balanced by a wry humor. Much of Clarksdale's heritage is housed here at the Delta Blues Museum, located in the old freight depot. It celebrates the musicians who are closely associated with the town: Charlie Patton, Son House, Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, Sam Cooke, and Ike Turner. Some blues musicians never left the Delta. Others, like Muddy Waters, did. It's said he boarded a bus right here at this station and joined the 6 million other black Southerners in the Great Migration North. "I'm going to pack my suitcase," Muddy sang, "and make my getaway." The exposure Muddy Waters' music found in Chicago launched the Delta Blues into the mainstream. It's influenced musicians around the world. But it's Clarksdale that remains ground zero for the blues. That's also the name of this blues club, co-owned by actor and Mississippi native Morgan Freeman. Ground Zero sometimes books national acts, but in the Delta, there's always plenty of local talent. It would be hard to imagine Louisiana without its sparkling, pulsating soul, New Orleans. It's a mecca for the culturally curious, a melting pot of sounds and flavors. It was here where Chef Emeril Lagasse, inspired by local Creole and Cajun spices, launched his food empire. And where a one-time bootlegger named Pat O'Brien disguised the taste of cheap rum with fruit juice and sugar to create New Orleans' famous hurricane drink. Still served right here at O'Brien's popular Courtyard Bar. But this city isn't just a place to party. It also has a dark edge, even in daylight. And hurricanes aren't the only threat. New Orleans has one of the highest murder rates in America and a colorful history of criminal enterprise. One of the first American mafia families got their start on the city's waterfront, extracting protection money from dock workers and other laborers. But there's a unique twist on just about everything in New Orleans. Around the time that trumpeter Louis Armstrong was getting his start playing on riverboats like this one, a serial killer called the Axeman is said to have vowed that he would spare potential victims if he found them listening to jazz. One reason so many different people have called New Orleans home over the centuries is that this city has welcomed just about anyone. Even before the Civil War, a community of freed African slaves thrived here, in this neighborhood called Treme. It's home to St. Augustine Catholic Church. Built in 1842 by free people of color, it opened its doors to blacks and whites, who each raced to buy pews in the church for their own communities. In the end, the famous War of the Pews was won by blacks who purchased 3 for every 1 bought by whites, and designated many of their seats for the use of slaves, making St. Augustine the most integrated congregation in the country. Jazz great Louis Armstrong was born in New Orleans in 1901. He was the grandson of African slaves. His legacy is honored at Armstrong Park, next to the very site where the city's early jazz fests were held, Congo Square. It was in this square that West African slaves once gathered to play music and dance. Whether here in Tremé or down in the French Quarter, New Orleans is nothing if not a reflection of America itself, a rich blend of cultures and traditions.
Music has long been a form of protest and empowerment. And on this day, August 1st, in 1934, a musician by the name of Huddie Ledbetter, better known as Leadbelly, was released from Angola prison following a petition for his release along with recordings of his music. And today, artists are still using their platforms to fight for racial justice. I'm Domati Pungo, and over the next few weeks, we'll be drawing parallels between these significant moments in history and what we see happening on the streets today. History can give us the context to better understand what we're living through today. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak to one of our country's leading historians about how understanding our history can help us to move forward. I'll be in conversation with Lonnie Bunch, who's the first African-American secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and the founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African-American History and Culture. Who was Leadbelly and why is he so important to these conversations about music as a form of protest?
Well, Leadbelly was someone who loved to play the guitar and found the blues. And by finding the blues, he found his voice. And his songs are songs that tell us about what it's like to be black and to be a sharecropper, what it's like to be black and have to face racial discrimination. And because he was in prison several times, it was also, his songs tell us about all those black men that got caught up in the criminal justice system who were put on chain gangs. And so in some way, his music is captured partly because it's the best representation of a particular genre, but also because it really is the music that is both of resiliency and pain. And in some ways, his music captured what life was like for Black Americans in the early 20th century.
Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heaven-loving light on me.
What Leadbelly experienced when he was incarcerated in that Angola prison reminds me so much of Meek Mill's incarceration and how afterward, to this day, Meek has become, an advocate for prison reform and a voice against mass incarceration through his reform initiative. What happened with Leadbelly for folks who aren't familiar with his history? And why was he incarcerated? And what was that movement like for him to be freed and for his music to come to the forefront?
Well, in some ways, Leadbelly ran afoul of a system that had taken so many African-American men, the convict lease system, right? That this was the way that prisons were able to sort of rent out their labor. To build the roads in the South, to build buildings. And so there was a great desire to snap up people like Leadbelly. And what I think is so powerful, though, is that Leadbelly's music was one of the reasons he ultimately was let free, because basically the Library of Congress came down and taped Leadbelly's music. People saw it, in a way, they saw it as authentic. He really illuminates the penal system. And that suddenly it's not they're just criminals, but they're people who a system breaks. They're people who a system unfairly incarcerates without knowing when they can be free. And that in essence what you now see are other rappers who talk about mass incarceration. That's what Leadbelly was talking about. They just didn't call it mass incarceration. And I think so what you see with Leadbelly is a sense of, let me illuminate where I see evil, and I see evil in the prison system.
If you ever go to Houston, oh, you better walk right, and you better not squabble, and you better not fight. Best Bronco will arrest you, hit the boom and take it down. You can bet your bottom dollar that you're sugar land bound. Let the midnight.
What's so dope about Leadbelly as I researched him, as I study him, I had a black studies professor in college that always had us, he didn't even let us listen to his lyrics first, he let us read them first. And there were so many parallels between Leadbelly and rappers. He reminds me of an MC. There's a grittiness, there's the understanding of the underbelly of society, this window into mass incarceration, as you mentioned. And, you know, when you think of protest music, you know, a lot of times we think about songs like We Shall Overcome, we think about Negro spirituals, Change is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. And then you have another sector of protest music that has a different kind of aggression, where the anguish and pain is manifested and explained differently. You can talk about the array of protest music and how it feels and sounds differently and hits different parts of us in several ways.
Well, music is so important on so many levels. On the one hand, it's about protest. But on the other hand, the music is also about community and gives people common understanding and common ground. And so what I find so powerful, for example, is talking to someone like Bernice Johnson Reagan, who was part of the Freedom Singers, and she talked powerfully about during the 60s, they would be in a church and they'd be surrounded by people who wanted to do them harm. And they would sing these songs of protest to give them a sense of strength, a sense of possibility they could move forward. On the other hand, then you get people who are shaped by the desire to protest and frame the music a little differently.
If I never make it, Lord knows I will never stop. Sometimes I fall flat down on my face. Get up, get back in the race. I'm all alone, I've got to hold on. Oh, Lord knows.
So for me, what I see in this music is really an opportunity to capture the fears, the hopes, capture the pain. And by capturing that pain, you're motivating people to continue to struggle. At the very least, what you're doing is letting people know they're not alone. To me, it's really, you don't have successful protest movements without the music.
We all live black and white. Yeah. To fight for equal rights. Yeah. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
You touched on something poignant in that first anecdote about how the music will placate the oppressors in different ways. And there's a parallel for that today where it seems there's a segment of white America that loves black art, but doesn't love black people.
Yes, Lord. I wish they loved black people as much as they love black culture.
You know? And how has I think that the window into society where we're seeing the younger people become more open to conversations about racial justice, it's because of this understanding that there is this relationship to black culture, that they have to reckon with all of the elements of black culture. How has America's love for black culture given us a window to talk about some of these other issues?
Well, it's done many things. On the one hand, you could make an argument that things like Motown, the music of the late 50s and 60s, introduced so many white teenagers to black culture. Now, it was a romanticized black culture, but it was black culture nonetheless, and it was considered radical for these white kids to buy this music. And I love how Motown early didn't use pictures of blacks on their album covers. But the notion was that this kind of music would introduce you, if you were white, to a world that you would never have any other contact with. One of the challenges today is that you do see more people crossing those racial lines. So the music is still an introductory doorway to many, but more have relationships and cross lines than, let's say, 50 years ago. But I would argue that what the music does, especially protest music, it legitimizes the efforts by making clear that this is what's going on. It's allowing people to hear the challenges in a way that they wouldn't by reading about it or looking at the newspaper. And what it does is it allows you to tap your toes and still be in the fight for social justice.
That's right. A good example of that is Kendrick Lamar's "We Gon' Be Alright." And I remember going to a march and hearing that song erupt into protest. And it's like it was a mix of joy, it was a mix of passion, it was a mix of anger and confusion as the officers are looking like, you know, what's, yeah, and people are yelling this out.
We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright.
It reminded me of something I've seen folks at the Smithsonian say before, that hip hop is folk music, that it's a musical revolution that embodies the voice of an entire generation. So it comes as no surprise that you guys are putting together an anthology of hip hop. What would that entail? What does that look like? Who are some of the folks that you guys are featuring? What artifacts can I see? I'm gonna go there and nerd out. Like, what's the situation behind that?
One of the things that we realized is that hip hop really is the music of several generations now. And it is a music that is urban. It's the music of anger and hope. And it's the music that you can tap your toes to. And so what we want to do is we recognize that hip hop and rap are crucially important. And yet there are large segments of the population who think, what is that music? They don't know it. And they think it's something that's maybe not as good as Smokey Robinson or Pat Boone. But the Smithsonian is the great legitimizer. So there are going to be people who will come to it who wouldn't have come to it without this. And we want to make sure then that we tell the stories. If you go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, you'll see material from LL Cool J and NWA and Chuck D. And so we think that it was important to say this music is part of the sweep of the African American experience. This is all part of a tradition that tries very hard to capture the best of what a community is, but also challenges the community and the country to not accept where it is.
There's something powerful, Secretary Bunch, about having you there in particular as a founding member of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, in really cementing all elements of our culture, what some consider fringe elements, and legitimizing them. You know, what is it about, you know, the fringe elements of music and the rebellious nature of youth-led movements, the rebellious nature of Tupac Shakur, that appeals to so many segments of society and kind of, you know, puts hip-hop in this space where even with its problematic elements, it's a driving force for protest and social justice and change?
I think, first of all, as you framed it, it's the music of several generations. So those generations immediately feel connected, immediately recognize the crisis that you're in, the challenges that you face, and that ultimately what this does more than anything else is that it inspires people to feel a sense of community and to use that community to push for change. In some ways, what I think the strength of rap and hip hop historically has been, when you look at some of the soul music of the 60s, you know, it had to make the rough edges smooth. You compare Motown to, you know, Stax, which was rougher, which was truer to a Southern black experience. But what you find in rap and hip hop is you find music that is as true as it can be. And that, to me, is unbelievably powerful.
And I see beauty in hip hop and in the history of black music as a protest, man. I appreciate what you guys are doing at the Smithsonian with this.
Thank you.
This is dope. That's dope. That's dope. I'm so excited about that conversation, man. I'm a hip hop head, Secretary. I mean,
I got you.
I love that. I love that conversation.
My mom and my sister were really into African American history and activism and social justice. There was always these big discussions about it in the house, and books by Angela Davis and, you know, Nikki Giovanni and all, you know, all these amazing poets and writers and scholars. And I just kind of rejected all of it. I just went, okay, yeah, black people had it bad, whatever. You know, I want to go sing opera. And, you know, it's really funny because that stuff, like, obviously settled into my bones, because when I started exploring the banjo and then I found out all this history, that was my in into our history was through the music, you know? African American history is American history. That it's important to know who the founding fathers were, and it's also important to know who built the White House, and it's important to know who built the railroads, and it's important to know the nameless people. You know, they're the ones who get left out, but they're the ones who do all the work. Music can really help bring to life those voices, you know, through song and instrumentation.
One young singer who has found the multicultural market that eluded Leadbelly is Valerie June. Much has changed in 80 years, but her 2014 stripped-back style is very reminiscent of the early Leadbelly field recordings. For her, a good song transcends categorization and belongs to everyone.
Nobody took anything from us in the world of music. Like, we needed to get away from certain memories. Like, sometimes when I'm listening to a hip-hop song and I'm listening to the dark, dark lyrics, it reminds me so much of listening to the old blues guys, because that stuff can get really dark. What I think it is more that white people appreciate the blues music that was being made at that time so much that they want to learn how to play it too.
What ended up getting lost in translation about our culture and our music when it comes to folk and blues, jazz, rock and roll, or whatever, is that this music came out of Louisiana, and the blues is not the Oxford Dictionary definition of melancholy, sad, depressed, all these kind of things. African Americans in New Orleans, I mean, we did not invent the sad song. We did not invent the melancholy. We invented Saturday night. Saturday night was invented in Louisiana.
Her name is Josie, and she ain't so nosy. Her name is Josie, she ain't so nosy. Her name is Josie, and she ain't so nosy, but boy, she's so cozy. Keep your hands off, keep your hands off, keep your hands off, keep your hands off. Keep your hands over. You hear what I say. You know she don't belong to you.
From Saturday night to Sunday morning, some experiences are universal.
Black girl, don't lie to me. Tell me, where did you sleep last night? In the pines, where the sun never shines. I wish you would.
In 1990, Seattle grunge musician Mark Lanigan recorded Leadbelly's atmospheric classic, Black Girl, Where Did You Sleep Last Night, with Nirvana's Kurt Cobain. The raw grunge arrangement perfectly evokes the anguish of the Leadbelly original.
Leadbelly's music, it mapped out a road for artists to express sort of the deeper qualities of human emotion into their songs. It also gave voice to themes of solidarity, of protest in music.
Everybody uplifting each other and everybody listening. I mean, we need that more in our day-to-day life, in our political life, in our family life, in our anything, listening to each other. And I feel like playing music together is a model for how to be good citizens in the world.
Sing a speed, sing a silence, keep us moving, keep us breathing with your hands. You can step us and dance. Oh, you take our children.
There's some painful parts of our past, parts of our ancestry that, you know, it's really easy to just kind of bury it and kind of move on, but to just put this record out as being like, here it is, this is it, and we've all got to work through this together.
Hey, folks.
Hey, Jason, man.
How are you? Good to meet you, too.
Welcome to Folk Life section of the Smithsonian.
Thank you. This is exciting.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
Like
place.
Guthrie, Jason Isbell came from small-town America to become a critically acclaimed songwriter and performer. Jason loves music history, and Jeff has a tale to tell. Woody's classic song, "This Land Is Your Land," was long rumored to have missing verses lost to time.
One was a verse about standing in bread lines, and another verse was talking about a sign that said private property, but no one had ever heard him sing it.
Jeff has been at Folkways for 26 years, but his biggest moment of discovery was finding this vanished treasure.
So I was sitting here back in the 90s, I was digitizing these discs. I played it, and it had one of those famous verses in it that he never supposedly ever sung.
Wow.
And I was just kind of floored, totally floored.
Guthrie's missing verses found after 50 years in the original recording of the song.
This one here is the King Daddy of them all. This is his first time he ever played This Land Is Your Land.
Turns out the campfire tune we all know started life as a protest song about the line between have and have not.
There was a big high wall.
This is the verse.
This is
Tried to stop me. Sign was painted, said private property. But on the backside, it didn't say nothing. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps.
Pollard. I love that one.
Sands,
He always says it like that, no matter what version.
all around.
In a few short lines, Guthrie captured both the promise and frustration of the America he knew.
Highway, and I saw above me.
It was so cool just to be in the presence of that object that's such a huge part of American music history. It's as if it had an aura of its own. It just was a really special experience.
Jason has invited Melissa to sound check for a private performance.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to New York Island, from the redwood forest.
The lyrics are still so relevant, but also to hear how music can still stir a part of you, and it's just exciting to hear that song in a new light.
When the sun came shining, I was strolling, in the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling. Voice was chanting as the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.
Prince's guitar very much suited who he was. He encouraged all of us to be ourselves, and that's one of his most significant contributions. Even his guitar did that. I mean, this is kind of the key to understanding Prince through an object. When Prince donated the guitar to the American people, we didn't know a whole lot about it. We knew that it was an incredible donation. When Prince began actively pursuing a career as a musician, he began to establish himself in this landscape of music that was heavily steeped in the time in disco and funk. After a stretch of time, a lot of albums, you know, from the Beatles and Bob Dylan and others in the 1960s and early 1970s had really invited contemplation. But a new revival of dance had really swept the country. And Prince was very much a part of that, and that was a fundamental part of his DNA that remained in place for the rest of his career. He built slowly a career through the late 1970s and the early 18s.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is Prince.
People knew who Prince was. He wasn't a superstar.
I mean, this is not the kind of music that comes from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
No.
That's it. You're very shy, modest.
So by 1982, when he released 1999, he had developed a following in different parts of the country and then totally hit the airwaves across the country with the singles that came off of that record. A number of critics really see Prince as the exemplar, kind of the first successful artist who undertook a postmodern view of music making, in the sense that he wasn't simply a crossover artist. He was actually breaking apart these genres and breaking apart musical categories and repurposing them to meet his own ends. He was encouraging all of us to reimagine those boundaries and those binaries.
I was brought up in a black and white world, and I strive for originality in my work.
The early 80s are defined visually in many ways through the influences of MTV, which was strike at the imaginations of teenagers in profound ways. Prince was one of the very first to challenge that virtual exclusion of black artists on MTV when he produced 1999. The song's end-of-time lyrics and up-tempo dance beats resulted in an Armageddon party jam. He, along with Michael Jackson in particular, were the first artists to begin to remake the roster of artists that were represented on MTV at the time. After 1984, Prince had turned the country purple. He's working on the film Purple Rain, and as he's working on the songs that will go into the soundtrack, he begins thinking about a guitar that really suits what he sees as his sound. When he asked Nuke Coupe in Minneapolis to execute this design, to take Jeff Levin's bass and to transform that into a guitar, they looked around the shop to see how they could do that, because no guitar manufacturer was building guitar bodies quite shaped like that. And everyone stopped in their tracks when they saw it. The body broke the conformity of kind of jagged edges that you'd see in most guitars from the period, kind of very masculine colors, masculine designs. This was a guitar that was flowing. Eventually, within a couple of years, he's asking his guitar techs to apply new fret markers on the guitar that combine the Mars and Venus male and female symbols along the neck of the guitar. So he had this guitar built in the fall of 1983, and it's around the time that they're still working on Purple Rain and begins introducing them to live audiences for the first time following the release of the film and the soundtrack. Prince would take two of these guitars, the cloud guitars, on the road with him. He had a penchant for throwing guitars up in the air. So he would, in dramatic flair, sling these guitars that were custom built for him, these beautiful jewels. He would just throw them up in the air, and often the roadies would catch them. They didn't always catch them. Sometimes they came crashing down on the stage and would break in half. So he began shipping them back to Minneapolis, where the crew had rebuilt the guitar, stripped the paint, they'd repaint it a different color, and then he would coordinate guitars with his clothes that he was going to wear on stage. Prince donated the guitar to the Smithsonian in 1993, and it was a relatively unceremonious affair. He essentially packed up the guitar and shipped it. The Smithsonian staff at the time developed the story around Nuke Coupe, the company in Minneapolis that had developed the guitar. The staff immediately noticed on the back of the guitar, there's a little fleck of another color underneath the yellow paint. John Woodland, who's managing the guitar collection at Paisley Park, reached out to us. He believed that some specific analysis of the guitar might help us to better understand its history. We loaded up the guitar under armed guard in a van, drove it about 600 feet next door to the Natural History Museum, brought it inside and ran it in the CT scanner. The CT scan revealed for us what the guitar was made from and how it was made and how well or not it was taken care of. We were able to identify 7 distinct layers of paint on this guitar. The colors included white, peach, there's a couple different layers of yellow as well. The CT scan, the paint analysis that is ongoing, the oral histories that we are continuing to collect as we work with Paisley Park, it's pointed all signs to the conclusion that this actually is the guitar that's hanging in the window in Purple Rain. In the film, as a white instrument. This is the guitar that's on the cover of Sign of the Times, which is perhaps his most critically acclaimed album. It was a feeling of discovery that I'd never experienced before, and a feeling of joy. Everything comes together with this instrument. And the mystery continues to intrigue us as we search for more answers and draw more conclusive evidence at the same time. There's an exuberance about the song Purple Rain that was totally enchanting. As a kid growing up in southeastern Alabama, he represented a world that I had not yet encountered but was eager to find. It is impossible to overstate how transformative Prince was as a guitar player. He was incredibly inventive on the instrument, incredibly melodic and thoughtful in his musical choices on the guitar. I mean, the guitar solo in Purple Rain can still bring tears to my eyes.